This file was not meant to remain open, and yet it found you. You are now entering a recorded field transmission from the Department of Lost Places. This is archive entry 025. The subject of this record is known as the Tidepool of Lost Voices. Among the many coastal locations preserved within department archives, few are smaller, and few are more difficult to explain. Unlike harbours, observatories, islands, or lighthouses, the Tidepool of Lost Voices occupies no vast territory, no hidden coastline, no forgotten sea. It is, by every observable measure, simply a tide pool, a shallow pool of sea water left behind when the tide retreats. And yet department records suggest that within this modest place rests one of the most unusual archives ever documented. The first verified account originates from a naturalist exploring an isolated stretch of coastline more than 70 years ago. The tide had withdrawn unusually far. Rock formations emerged from the sea. Narrow channels wound beneath stone outcrops. Pools of water reflected the evening sky. The naturalist reported hearing voices. Not loudly, not clearly, faintly, as though conversations drifted across great distances. Assuming nearby travellers were responsible, he followed the sounds. Eventually he reached a single tide pool surrounded by smooth black stone. The voices seemed to originate from the water itself. When he looked into the pool, he saw only his reflection. The voices ceased immediately. The account might have been dismissed had similar reports not continued appearing over subsequent decades. Today, the department maintains more than 100 independent observations. Remarkably, they agree on nearly every significant detail. The tide pool appears only during exceptionally low tides. Visitors typically discover it while wandering coastlines during periods of reflection. Not searching, not exploring, simply walking. The sort of walk people take when thoughts feel larger than usual. The approach often begins with sound, not words, the suggestion of words. A distant conversation, a fragment of laughter, the cadence of a story, a melody almost remembered. These sounds seem to drift upon the wind before gradually leading visitors toward the pool itself. The tide pool is rarely impressive in appearance. Indeed, several surveyors admit they nearly walked past it. A circular basin, no more than a few meters across, clear water, dark stone, small shells scattered around the edge. Nothing extraordinary until one listens. The voices become most noticeable when the surrounding coastline falls quiet, when waves recede, when seabirds drift elsewhere, when attention softens. Then the tide pool begins to speak. The department uses the term speak cautiously. No direct communication has ever been recorded. No messages, no instructions, no warnings. The voices are fragments, moments, echoes. Visitors report hearing snippets of conversations, half-remembered stories, words spoken long ago, questions, promises, farewells, songs. Curiously, none appear distressing. Even sorrowful voices carry an atmosphere of gentleness. The pool does not preserve pain, it preserves presence. One surveyor described the experience as standing beside the memory of language itself. The department continues to regard this as one of the most accurate descriptions on record. Several researchers initially proposed that the voices belonged to people who had been forgotten. Subsequent observations complicated this theory considerably. Many voices appear familiar. Not personally familiar, universally familiar. The sound of encouragement, the sound of reassurance, the sound of a story being told around a fire, the sound of someone saying goodbye, the sound of someone saying welcome home. The Tidepool appears less concerned with individual identity than human experience. Near the water's edge, visitors often discover small objects deposited amongst the stones. A button, a seashell, a ribbon, a smooth piece of glass, a folded scrap of paper. These objects vary between encounters, yet they share a common characteristic. Each feels connected to a memory, not necessarily the visitor's own, simply a memory. The department has never successfully removed any item from the site. Objects invariably disappear before departure. Researchers now consider them part of the archive itself. One of the most intriguing features appears only under particular conditions. When the sea is exceptionally calm and the sky reflects perfectly within the water. At such times, visitors may notice that the tide pool seems deeper than it should be. Far deeper. The reflected sky extends downward. The water becomes impossible to measure. The voices become clearer, not louder, closer. Several surveyors describe hearing stories, not complete narratives, fragments, the beginning of a tale, the middle of a memory, the final sentence of a journey. The department believes the pool may function as a gathering place for unfinished echoes, words released into the world that continue travelling long after they are spoken. This interpretation gained considerable support following observations by surveyor Alias Hart. While seated beside the pool, Hart reportedly heard a voice say, "Perhaps someone will need this later." The statement appeared entirely ordinary, yet it affected him profoundly. Years afterward, Hart reflected that many of the most important things he had ever learned came from words someone had spoken without knowing who might eventually hear them. The department subsequently incorporated this insight into ongoing research. At the northern edge of the tide pool stands a weathered stone marker. Unlike most inscriptions found throughout department locations, the message is brief. Nothing spoken with care is ever truly lost. The origin of the inscription remains unknown. The sentiment, however, appears central to understanding the archive. The tide pool does not collect voices because they are trapped. It collects them because they continue travelling. A kind remark, a useful lesson, a comforting story, a shared memory. These things move through the world much like tides themselves, returning in unexpected places, reaching distant shores, influencing people they were never intended to reach. As evening approaches, the sea gradually returns. The tide rises. Water fills surrounding channels. Waves reclaim the coastline. Visitors often remain as long as possible, listening, observing, remembering. Eventually the pool disappears beneath the sea. The voices fade. The surface becomes indistinguishable from the surrounding water. Nothing marks its location. And yet many visitors leave carrying a peculiar feeling. Not nostalgia, not sadness. Connection. The sense that human lives overlap far more than they appear to. That countless unseen influences move quietly between us. That stories, kindness, wisdom, and memory travel much further than we realize. The department classifies the Tidepool of Lost Voices as Type, Coastal Echo Archive, Linguistic Preservation Site, Maritime Memory Habitat, Access Level, Occasional, most frequently encountered during periods of reflection, remembrance, or quiet contemplation. Final note from the archivist. The sea possesses an unusual relationship with memory. It receives rivers from distant lands, carries messages between shores, returns objects long after they had vanished from sight. Perhaps language behaves similarly. Words leave us, stories travel, conversations continue beyond the moments in which they occur. The Tidepool appears dedicated to preserving this truth, a reminder that meaningful things rarely disappear completely. They simply continue their journey, often beyond the limits of our hearing. This concludes archive entry 025. The record is sealed. The tide is returning. The voices continue travelling. End transmission.